dog in your life is thinking? Well, join me, Liz Murdoch, animal communicator, talking with the dogs and finding out what dogs want people in their lives to know and understand. I've spent my life talking and listening to animals. So if you consider yourself a dog person or just happen to have a dog, I'm here to help you learn how to talk or listen to the dogs in your life. I chat with people too, sharing stories and tips on exactly how animal communication or being a dog whisperer makes an impact at home or when working with the dogs. So welcome to Talking with the Dogs podcast, a place where we uncover exactly what dogs want us to know and celebrate that every dog has a story. This episode is brought to you by Noble Pet Foods. No nonsense, no bull. Go to noblefoods.com, use promo code DOGTALK15, and they'll deliver dog food to your house with Noble. Welcome to Talking with the Dogs. Today we have a special episode on the 5 senses of grief. And I have my daughter Grace here, who some of you may have heard on our episode, Growing Up with the Dogs, what it's like to grow up with an animal communicator. And unfortunately, we recently had to say goodbye to Teddy, our 13-and-a-half-year-old dog, who came into our lives when Grace was in 2nd grade. Grace, welcome, and thank you for participating on this, sharing our story about Teddy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
So, Grace, I'm going to give a backstory about Teddy, and I want you to chime in your experience. For those of you listening, Teddy was 13 and a half. He was slowing down, but we didn't think it was going to be imminent, right, Grace?
No, I mean, we didn't exactly know when anything was going to happen. He had seemed perfectly healthy. He had been going on hour walks. He was smiling and living life as normal, and this was totally out of the blue.
Yes. And the only thing, which I later admitted to Grace, that I had noticed that every so often he would go into these sleeps that I was like, oh my gosh, is he alive? He was in such a deep sleep. And one point I said to him, Teddy, if you need to go, it's okay, which I didn't mean, but no, it was okay. But that was, other than that, he had some stiffness, but not a lot. And he seemed pretty healthy. Like, wow, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was no telltale sign before, as
exactly.
I mentioned, that was an indicator that he was going soon. But he was quite old and had a very good life.
He was 13 and a half. So I woke up Sunday morning at 5:30, and there was a racket in the kitchen, and I went out and he was having a seizure, and I thought it was a stroke. You know, I don't diagnose, so we don't know for sure, but the vet, when we did go, said it must have been a stroke or some sort of seizure. And I called Grace and I said,
no, I heard it. You said, Grace, help. And and then I heard it and I saw his legs all twisted and it was horrific. And, you know, it jolted us both awake. I know it jolted me awake.
We were. And I said, get a bed, because there was not a bed in the kitchen. So she ran and got a dog bed that we could get him. The goal was to get him onto a bed once he had stopped writhing, and we started tapping. Do you remember that?
Yeah, he liked it. He responded well to it. It calmed him down. And so some of you may know that I do tapping, and we did on the head. It was all I could do because I felt so helpless. And I remember saying, Grace, tap with me. And so we just tapped on our head and the inside of the eyes, outside of the eyes. And we even tapped on him too.
When we got him onto the bed, yes, you're right. He was disoriented and his legs he wasn't comfortable. So I started tapping on his head. And as you said, it calmed him.
It really calmed him down. I mean, the two of us were both tapping on ourselves for a while, like waiting for him to stop having convulsions and just get comfortable. And then when he was settled, which took quite a bit of time, my mom, were able to start tapping on him.
Yeah. And it was evident that through some of the energy work that she later did as well, how much that made a difference.
Yes, because his legs, so for instance, his back legs, when he plopped sort of down very awkwardly onto the bed, one of his back legs was not, it was like it was stuck under him, and I couldn't move it easily. So I started massaging the paw, and as that relaxed and the paw like a little bit came out, sort of like the witch on the Wizard of Oz, and you saw just the shoe, and the whole leg started to stretch as I was working on his leg and his body, and he relaxed. And oh my gosh, thinking about it, I started to relax as I'm talking about him relaxing. So we had that, and then it was like, oh no, and we could see his eye wasn't on the left side.
Yeah, I mean, I saw more of his face than I think you did because you were behind him, and his head was tilted and his eyes, I think it was his left eye was like a lot more shut, like a similar symptom that, you know, people have when they have strokes. But yeah, it was very clear that he was unwell. And then seeing the difference in his eyes after the energy work and after the tapping was done on ourselves, that we did on ourselves, and that was done on him. And it settled him. And I'm somebody who has grown up with energy work. I mean, I was made aware of what like Reiki and energy healing was when I was like 7 or 8.
Yeah, I got certified in Reiki. Somebody bought it at a school auction and invited me to go to her Reiki certification, and I went. And came home and did it on you.
Yeah, you did it on me, and I immediately understood it and figured out how it worked for me and how I could see it and understand it and make sense of it. And that same knowing has still stuck with me all these years. I mean, that's almost like 12 years ago. 13 years ago. Wow. It doesn't matter. But yeah, like seeing that difference on him was a clear energetic shift.
So we're talking about emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping. And so that helped all of us, calmed us down, and I guess we went back to bed and got up, and I called a vet emergency, and they asked, how long did the seizure last? And I said, about a minute or so, minute and a half. And they said, well, we have a 5 to 7 hour wait. It's not critical, keyword critical. 5 to 7 hour wait. If it was more than 4 minutes, what I was told, then it was more severe. But to watch him, especially since he was 13 and a half, and I gave his statistics, how much he weighed and all that. So we watched him. And
that was the brutal part, not knowing what to do or what to expect. And he's there helpless. I mean, that was like agonizing.
It was. And he wouldn't eat.
Yeah, he stopped eating, and he hadn't, by the time we put him to sleep, he hadn't eaten in 4 or 5 days.
5 days. Yeah. So he was drinking water, and he would drink water and he would walk around our yard. And he surprised us one day. Somebody arrived at our house who he knew. And remember, Matt came?
Oh, yeah.
And Teddy got up and went sort of running down the stairs. I mean, wobbly kind of running.
And this was after not being able to stand or even like have any control of his limbs. It was just like miraculous and like evidence of a living being's strength.
Yes. And I have noticed that with other animals that I've worked with. I had a client who actually, her dog had a stroke, and she brought the dog to my house at like 10 o'clock at night because she just panicked. And she's like, I'm just going to take my dog to Liz. And her dog, actually, I worked on the dog a bit, and it walked around our yard, but it passed away the next day. That animals sometimes, from my experience, and they will have a burst of energy.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because something that Teddy did was when he was up, I think it was after Matt was here, he went outside and sniffed the entire front yard. And we have a fairly large front yard.
Mm-hmm.
He sniffed the entire perimeter, being very thorough, as he always is when he sniffs things.
Right.
And it was like, how is he doing this? And like, why? And it was clear that was based off of what you're saying, like the one last moment that he needed to do to cross off his list before he passed. And same thing with like sunbathing in our backyard and going to his spot that he would always be in our rose garden.
Yeah, he did that. And on his last day, so he was drinking water. We'll explain it to people. He would drink his water and then he would go to the bath. He did get up to go to the bathroom outside. He was always a dog. He was a rescue, so I don't know where he came from initially, but he was not a dog who ever wanted to go to the bathroom publicly. So he was not one who was going to wet the bed and lose bladder control. And he would get up and go to the bathroom till his last day. But then he would come back inside and sleep for hours. That was all he could do. But on his last day, he did that perimeter patrol, and he even went up to the back area, which he hadn't done. And I remember looking like, where is he? And I had a knowing sense like, he's just checking that area. He had gone up there and then he came back and he was drained. People ask about how do you know when it's time? And I'm going to have Grace touch on that as well, how we came to the decision, because I think it's not, I know it's not an easy one. And Teddy, we took him to the vet for an exam, and they call it a end of life assessment.
And quality of life assessment.
Quality, I think, yeah.
Quality of life.
I don't think they're going to say end of life.
It was quality of life.
We did a quality of life assessment, and they determined that he was not critical, but that they could do further test the next day or whenever to determine if he had an underlying condition, because we had never known that he had never had anything show up, but they were once offered that. But the vet also said, since he's 13 and a half, it's not necessarily something we recommend, because at 13 and a half, you're going to be treating something that's already shown you that it's causing a major issue. And so they recommended euthanasia, which
then and there.
Yes. And you immediately said no.
I was like, I was weeping. I wasn't sobbing. I wasn't holding back tears, but there were definitely, my eyes were welled and there were a couple streams down my face. But yeah, I was like, no, this is so clinical. It's so sterile.
It was 10 o'clock at night.
It was
at a
sterile.
Vet emergency.
And I was like, this is not the end. Like, we at least need one more night. Like, I don't care that I don't care that this is an option now. Like, he needs to be at home. We need one more night with him. That's meaningful to me. And I understood that it was his time. I don't want to say I didn't care, but I didn't care that he was ready to go.
Did you not think he was? You thought?
I understood he was ready to go, regardless of what I had a notion of. Like, I knew that he knew he was ready to go.
But did you think he could wait?
I thought he could wait one night.
Okay.
But I cared about how he went and how I wanted the end to be. I didn't care. I understood, maybe not care. I understood that it was his time. I understood that I could see it in his eyes that it was communicated that he was done.
So you had a knowing sense from what you saw in his eyes.
Yeah.
And what could you describe that for somebody who's not had a knowing sense?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just, I could look in his eyes and see how tired he was, and not in I've gone running for an hour in the sun on a 90-degree day on a hike, which I've done with him before. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that kind of tired where it's from physical exertion. It was like a tired that just felt like it was from his soul, that was not just tired eyes, but fatigue and lethargic and drained, and like there isn't a life force that's there.
So thank you for sharing that. We were at the vet, and when I called, we went to an emergency vet center to have him evaluated, and our regular vet had said, you can go to this location or this location because of the neurology aspect, because they said you might need to have a neurologist examine him. because of the symptoms that he showed of this stroke. And so they gave me several locations, and I picked the location that happened to be close to where our dog walker lived. And so I said, I let our dog walker know what had happened. And I said, if you want to come see us, this is where we're going to be. And he did. He came with his wife. And so there were the four of us with this decision. And his wife was also like, no, you can't just do this here. And which was fine, because I said, everybody gets to say whatever. We're all in this with him.
And they've known Teddy and all of our dogs for
years.
Yes.
They've taken care of them when we've gone away. And so it was great that we just happened to be there at an emergency room by their house, and they were available and they wanted to come. So they did. And she was like, no, it's not time. And it was interesting because she was also drawing from a past experience with a pet in her life that she had some lingering issues with, that she wasn't happy how it went, which is a big thing that comes up with people when we say goodbye to an animal, is that sometimes our feelings are tied to unresolved grief from the past. And so it was good that she could address that. I saw that's what it was. And I'm like, she's part of our team. I wanted her to be heard, and we are going to respect. I've got two people here, and I was sort of blank because I was numb. So I'm like, I'm going to go with that. I'm with that. So fine, we'll take Teddy home and we'll figure this out for tomorrow, what we're doing. We knew what we were going to do tomorrow, but we didn't know the how of it. And I did say to the vet who came out, I said, he needs some nutrients.
I insisted on the fluids.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He needed the nutrients.
Because we knew he'd been 4 days with just water, no food. And I was thinking, there's no way he can get to 5 days. He's going to be really uncomfortable. And so we did decide, right?
Yeah.
To have them give him some liquids. And then they gave him an IV, a bolus to take away nausea. And when he walked out, he was wagging his tail. He was slow, but he went straight to our dog walker.
And they got one last little walk.
Yes. And so I took care of the paperwork details with the vet, and our dog walker and Teddy had a final walk, which was really special for all of us. So then we got in the car and we took Teddy home, and he slept, and we got home and we were tired and sad, and we went to bed and just thought, we'll deal with it tomorrow. Right.
Yeah, I mean, every night after that stroke, I think I slept on the couch, like
that's
near
right.
Him.
You slept with him,
because I was like, if anything happens, I would have so much regret if I wasn't.
But that last night he walked when we came home. Remember, he walked into my room.
Yeah, he did,
and it was very definitive.
Yeah, he was, and that is something that he typically did and had done for years.
Yeah, he had slept in my room.
Yeah, so that was like a one last time.
We sort of knew he wanted one last night in my room. So he went back there, and the next morning when we got up, he went out and he had water, but this time, instead of drinking a normal amount as best he could, he had a sip, and then he looked up at me like, why would I drink this? And I knew that was it. He wasn't going to drink anymore. He was done. And that's when he, as you had mentioned, Grace, he went back to the cushion out in the sun. And one of the things I'd been doing was brushing him after the stroke to stimulate his body, the nerves, which he loved. And he would stand there and we would prop his feet up and try and help him. Like,
we even made him like a sling out of a sheet to hold his legs up.
Well, we had to, and you knew that from when Honey was paralyzed.
Yeah, the first, second, and third time she was paralyzed.
Yeah, Honey was paralyzed. That's another story. She's fine.
But yeah, like I made a sling because at one point, like his back legs weren't working at all, and so we would get him out there, and when his legs weren't working,
in the beginning of this, after the stroke,
or I would lift him up, or he would brush him, and then we would switch off on how he would get the weight lifted off. And sometimes he could stand for longer, and sometimes he couldn't stand as long. But the brushing, like he loved the brushing.
Yeah.
I mean, he loved the brushing before he had the stroke, but it was clear that brought him comfort, and that it brought relief, and that it felt good.
Yeah.
And at that kind of time, like anything that makes a dog or a person, whatever, comfortable at their last moments of life, like I think that's really special.
And so that was something that we were really watching him, like you could see too, about how he responded to the brushing. So when it comes to understanding your dog's signs, what they like, we knew he liked the brushing. We knew he liked the sun. We watched how he used his legs. They started to get better, but then he would stop and just stand, and I'd have to hold him up either from the front, or you were holding him from the back
with the sling
to take the weight off so he could pause before he walked back inside.
Yeah. And similar to what you were just saying about like knowing what your dog's favorite things are, you know, Teddy didn't want to eat, but Sam, the dog I grew up with, the dog I had when I was born and through when I was 12 or so, 10 or so, whatever, he was given food at the end of his life, his favorite foods right before he passed.
Yes.
He ate a whole thing of roast, like
bologna
or something.
Yeah.
That was his absolute favorite.
He ate it right before, but he wasn't able to go to the bathroom. You know, he had different issues. He was wetting everywhere.
Getting a dog's favorite things, a person's favorite things, whoever, whatever, that a person or human, as I'm saying, loves, is so special to make that passing from, you know, the world into the other world,
wherever they're
going, this lifetime, this earth, the world in which they're surrounded by the loved ones and the people that make their life.
So we had beds all over, and we knew what he liked, the blankets, and come to keep him comfortable. And he would choose between the bed with the bolster and the orthopedic, really thick bed. He would go back and forth between the two. And he liked how I would massage his legs and adjust them for him. And then there were times he wanted to be left alone, and we would just leave him alone. But we were very much watching him, what he wanted. And then the last day we just all stayed together, and this is another thing. Okay, so they gave us a list. Grace was like, and we agreed, you know, we're going to do this at home, which was talk about privilege. We have a new appreciation for that privilege of being able to have a vet come to the home. And a friend of mine, she said, I didn't know you could do that. And yes, there are vets and people who come to the home to euthanize an animal at home, and it can make a huge difference. The thing for anyone who this is new to is that not everyone is the same. I have a client who had a very bad experience because they felt like the person was not a good match and it was rushed. And I remembered this particular client's story that he shared. And so when I called somebody, because I didn't know, this is something most of us don't plan, but I do recommend that when you are having to face something, you know it's coming, that you call around and you just find out who might be available, who are your resources, just so you know. So I called, and the first person I talked to was not a match. And for me, she was very much like, well, how much does your dog weigh? Because they charge by weight. And I was like, oh, are you the person that comes to the house? She says, yes, I'm a technician. And I was like, oh. So I just said, I don't think we're a match. This is really a difficult time. I'm sorry. And I called the next person, who was lovely. And it made a huge difference because he was a vet. He was very kind. And what did he say to you, Grace, that made you feel so comfortable about waiting?
Oh, like you can wait as long as you want.
Yeah, he said he would wait as long
as we wanted to take as much time as we needed with Teddy before the euthanasia, before the injection of the
second shot. They give 2 shots.
They give the sedating one, and then they give the chemical, whatever it is that actually ends the life. And he was like, take as long as you need before that dosage of the sedative, after the like every step of the way, he was like, take your time.
Yeah.
Take your time. And you said this earlier, Mom, that you're like, he would have waited all day.
Oh my gosh, we live in Los Angeles. And I asked him where he was going after our house, and he told me, and I knew from experience, there's probably traffic, and he was not interested in that traffic. So
it was like hours of traffic.
It could have been, who knows, but he was very gracious. And so I just want to let people know that you do have a choice. Well, hopefully, it's a very personal decision, but we just wanted to share our experience.
And one thing I think it's notable in mentioning that doctor who did that and came to our home was that you even asked him if he ever gets like knowings from the dogs that or the pets that he ends up putting down, or pets in general. Like you asked that, Mom.
I did. I got a knowing sense from Teddy. So people ask if I get knowings from my own dogs. And so Teddy is lying there, and I am human, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I mean, Grace and I joked, can we just clone him? Grace wanted to clone him. I wanted to just keep him forever.
Yeah, I was like, I understand why people want to get like make taxidermy,
and then or they yell no when horrible things happen in movies, because I was like, I don't want to let you in my house.
I don't want to let you leave. Like,
yeah, we were not happy about this, but I was sitting with Teddy and I just had this knowing, ask him. So I'm like, oh brother. And I'm like, ask him. So I did it sort of like Teddy's final wishes. I said, do you believe, this is to this vet who is a surgeon who he felt a calling to do this during the pandemic, help animals cross over and at home. And so I said, do you believe that animals can communicate intuitively? And he said, yes, sometimes. And I was like, and I heard it again from Teddy, ask him. So I'm stroking Teddy and feeling a little sheepish. And I look at this vet and I said, would you be interested in being on my podcast and talking about your work?
And this was after he had sedated him.
He'd given Teddy the first shot. And I'm asking him to be on my podcast because I felt that Teddy wanted people to know this information. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, yes, he would do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just booked a podcast guest. But I felt,
I know, I was even a little like, Mom.
I know, but I did it for Teddy. So stay tuned for that one. But I did have a very knowing sense from Teddy, who is a very soulful, old, wise dog, that this experience is meant to be shared.
I mean, yeah, because Teddy had even gotten up for the vet. Did we mention that?
No, okay, so Teddy's on one bed, and the vet who I had just said, I really don't want you coming in my house because I didn't want this to happen. He walks in, very kind. Teddy looks at us, and I go, Teddy, this is Dr. Kevin. He's here to help you. And with that, Teddy, who'd been laying there for hours, got up, went over to him, and then moved over to this other bed that I'd sort of pulled out because it was a better location, thinking maybe this is where it will happen. And Teddy positioned himself in the perfect way.
Right in front of
this vet. Yeah. And I'm thinking, this is sort of weird. This is like he's done this before. But
he knew.
That's another, yeah, I don't know, but that's what happened.
And that's why, again, like I had no doubts that it was his time.
And we asked the vet, he did a check of his heart and everything prior. And I said, do you agree it's his time? And he just nodded yes.
Yeah.
There was no doubt. So take a breath.
The grief process.
So then it happened, and there's a video on my Instagram. Honey's crawling all over him, and that was okay. Grace, you were a little bit like,
I was like, honey, no, like there's this like dog who's dead, and honey, this tiny little dog like crawling and smelling all the different parts of his body
all over him.
I was like, that's disrespectful,
right?
And then you were like, no, like that's her smelling him and making sense that he's gone. And it's like animals grieve too, and
yeah,
she was making sense of it. And even now, like if we slightly mention Teddy at all, their ears turn, like their heads turn.
We have two dogs. Yes,
starts barking. They like will go to the door waiting for him. It's
animals
know. Animals understand.
And the vet agreed. He agreed to let Honey do that. Wolfgang didn't want to. He just sat and watched.
No, he even like during the process, he had his back turned to it and would like occasionally turn his head.
He'd look away.
He like couldn't watch it.
Aww. Well, I turned away too. So that's what happened. And then there's the grief part. And Dr. Kevin he had Teddy's body wrapped up. I went outside. I couldn't take it. I went outside. And when I came back in, Teddy was all wrapped up in a blanket. It was very nice. It's in my video that I posted. And we had some time, but his ears, his coat was still so beautiful. And it was just like, ugh.
It's not the same.
Yeah. But we wanted to keep his body with us. And that was sort of a new feeling to make sense
that,
of
like,
that.
tactile feeling and that sensation, that like that physical touch that means so much. Like the last hugs, more licks, like the things that make the interaction tactile. Like,
so that's what Grace and I've been talking about, and I've talked about it with some clients and my awareness. I've led grief groups with people about dogs and the animal communication part of it. I am not a grief coach. I work with them, I refer people, but I do communicate with animals that have crossed over. But I'm noticing a shift that it's so fresh with me that many people want signs from their animals. What does he say about what happened? And people want messages. But Grace and I are noticing, because we get messages from Teddy already, I mean, very clear signs. And I have had a student who sent me a text. She goes, I can't figure this out. This lock, and she kept describing it. I don't know what it means. And then I knew exactly what it meant. It was the lock at our gate that the vet had to go out when he took Teddy. And then she said, and something about Liz's mom. And I knew what she meant, that we felt that he was with my mom, because she didn't even know that my mother had already passed. So I told Grace the same message. And what did you think of that, Grace?
Well, when it happened, when he passed, the first thing I had was I can see him with Nana. Like, I literally like saw this light and I was like, I can see them together. Like right now, I can still think of it and remember the visual. And so for me, hearing that from you, that what your student said, I was like, oh yeah, but wow, that's profound that like she picked up on that, and that he even said that, yeah, I went through the gate and I'm with Liz's mom.
Yeah. So, and
that's a specific thing, like mom, like it wasn't mom, it was like Liz's mom.
It wasn't like, yes, exactly, dog mom. So that's, for those of you who study animal communication who are listening, that's a great example where the animal communicator doesn't necessarily need to know the meaning of a message,
or a person just trying to tune in.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It's when we give it to the animal's person to make sense of, that's where the sort of magic happens. But aside, so we have had those messages, and feelings that we know sort of intellectually in hearts, we understand about messages and signs, which we're fortunate because Grace has grown up around animal communication, and I talk to dogs all the time, and I get messages that are meaningful to people. But what we're noticing, and we wonder if it's also because we've been, he's been by our side on the couch for the 2 years of the pandemic, and we've spent so much time with him that we're missing his physical presence.
Yeah, I mean, that's not
like you said, the touch.
Yeah, the touch. I mean, the smell, the way he smiled. He had this magnetic, like quirky, exuberant, huge smile.
Like life is good.
Unlike any dog I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And like things like that, like smiling over no reason just because I'm there and petting him, are how I connect with him. The way he mastered the blinky eyes of Teddy, I love you, and he'd do this like big eye blink. Always.
We talked to Teddy a lot, right?
And and even the way he smelled, like he smells very different than Wolfgang and Honey.
So Wolfgang's a black lab and Teddy's a yellow lab, and they are so different.
All of them. And
so for us, again, we feel very privileged that we lost a dog, but we still have 2 other dogs. And so we have that presence in our home, but it's like, I have one child. It's like people who have children, multiple children, they're so different. Teddy was so different that there's this huge void. It's not just like, go get another dog. It's his personality, his old soulful
wisdom
of a dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to let people know, as somebody who works regularly with people dealing with grief and creating bucket lists before an animal crosses over and helping them with the decision-making process or how to know that this new aspect, I think it's new because I have not had many people talk about missing the physical part of their dog. Most people have typically wanted messages, but I think that there's an opportunity for us to learn more about grief. Unfortunately, who wants to learn more about grief? But those of you who might be professionals in coaching, it's like, I feel like I need a hug, or I want
Teddy's hug.
People need, I think more people need to be supported about the physical loss of an animal in their life. And I've created, like, I woke up from a deep sleep. We've been sleeping with wanting to hold something. And so I created this, what is it? The water bottle that says I'm here. Cause I think we want something to hold on to. Right.
Yeah.
And
like when he would hold my, like, I would have a panic attack and he would be here for me. He would like have his paw in my hand, sitting right next to me. Like, there were times like I had to do a bunch of seizure testing, and I was struggling with these spasms, and I was on the floor for one of them, and he came right up next to me, pressed his body next to me, and was just like staring at me into my eyes. And it brought me so much comfort because he was physically here for me.
Yeah.
And while he isn't physically here for me in that way, and in our house and on this world in that way, I miss that.
Right.
I miss that. And
hard.
Having that I am here, like that reminder, is meaningful because, well, yeah, again, like, he's not in the physical world with me. I mean, he can be energetically with me, but that energy is still here, even when the physical isn't.
So yes. So yeah. you feel that. And sometimes we can be aware of it more often than other times, but there's also, it's okay to miss that physical part of somebody who's just not physically here.
And the smell, I mean, the smell of his coat. I mean, I vividly remember the smell of my grandmother, Nana. I hugged my great aunt. I burst into tears practically. She smelled so similar. I was like, oh my God, you smell like Nana. You smell like my grandmother. And she was caught off guard, but it meant so much to me. And Teddy had a very distinct smell. Again, not like Wolfgang, not like Honey. And It was just like, I have a piece of his fur that the vet cut off. And smelling that, it like takes me back to who he is and what his presence was like. And there's a blanket that he had been on that I can't get myself to put in the washing machine, because I'm like, I'm not ready to let go of this. And that's okay.
Right.
But yeah, how that sense is also really, really strong on a smell. Like, smell means something and it evokes emotion.
Yeah.
Just as that physical touch does, and how physical touch and the smell go hand in hand.
For some people, yeah.
For some people, yeah. At least for me in this situation that I'm referring to, it's like, I not only miss hugging him because I can hug Wolfgang, who's around the same size, but I miss Teddy's coat, and I miss Teddy's smell, and I miss Teddy's feel, and how they all went together in tandem.
Right. Yeah.
And I have grief over that. Like, I don't know if I have the anger that usually like is one of the 5 stages of grief, because I'm not angry.
Well, we were very fortunate.
I understand that it was his time, and we were very fortunate. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
We were very fortunate that we could spend time at home with him.
Oh, it's such a privilege.
And that we knew. And even because I have had clients who it was a long drawn out process. Sometimes that's just how it happens. And people may have multiple vet visits or different incidents where we had a dog, Sam, who had cancer, and went through all the treatment, and his death was, his cancer was cured, thankfully, when he was 6, and he too lived to be 13 and a half. But his death was very different, even though he was a lab. And we feel very fortunate that our sudden death for us, and we're just life now, I'm grateful that it wasn't long, although I hate that it was sudden. But maybe as time goes on, we'll have perspective and whatever. But I think Grace and I wanted to share the realities of what we've been dealing with in case it helps somebody else, knowing about euthanasia at home as an option, knowing that it is possible to have someone come to home. It is possible to get messages and signs from animals that have crossed over.
And it's okay to talk about your dog forever and the details of their interpersonal life and how that affects you, not only as we're grieving and as we're making sense of it and as we're reflecting. Like, it's okay to want to talk about the nitty-gritty details with somebody because it's very real for you.
It's very real, especially with this pandemic, when we've been home with our dogs. People talk about the pandemic puppies and the things that go with them. But what about these dogs that we've been with and then they die? The emptiness, the loss, I think is probably got to be a little bit more profound, not to take away from other losses, but it's a new kind of grief because we were so close together when we were quarantining at home with our dogs.
I mean, we'd spend hours with him a day. Like,
he was everywhere.
Everywhere. Like, he was everywhere.
He followed us to go to the garbage can.
Like, everywhere. Yeah. Like, there were not maybe hours when I was in school that I didn't see him, but like, or when I would sleep, but there wasn't much time that went by where he wasn't in my presence or wasn't next to me or wasn't there for me. It just was, the bond grew so much stronger during COVID for me.
Mm-hmm. So as we wrap this up, I just also want to add that aside from the messages, because a lot of people talk about, oh, did you get a sign or watch for signs they're with you, that's all important. And yet there's also the senses of our dogs and this awareness that people might be a little shocked and that they didn't realize with this loss that, wow, I miss this physical aspect more, it's stronger. Or maybe because during the pandemic, I have talked to hundreds of dogs working at home on Zoom in my sessions. I'm so aware of the senses that having the senses taken away to communicate with Teddy when he was physically here is sort of jarring. And I just want other people, if you have noticed that, or you work with people, that we just be aware that people are also grieving the loss of the senses and the connection to our dogs as well.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Because I've never heard anybody talk about missing that as much. All my clients have been people have talked about messages.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to this specific of like, I just really miss my dog. It's like, what do you miss about your dog?
Mm-hmm.
I miss this. I miss him comforting me. I miss his smiles. I miss how he was on a walk. I miss his touch. Like all the things we've discussed. It's like, I miss my grandmother. What do I miss about her? I miss the way she laughed. Like I miss her essence. I miss the way she smiled. I miss the way she hugged me. Like I miss the things about this person, this being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those details can be harder to grieve
and talk about.
Yeah.
Because there's more people who we talk, I think it's more common to talk about people that we miss and what we did and share memories than it is about your dogs, unless you're doing it with someone who knew the dog. But anyway, we're trying to normalize it. We just want to share it. And we hope that this has helped people in some way or taught them a few things.
Yeah, even if it helps one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So reach out to me if you want any more information about Teddy. We're always glad to talk about Teddy. I'm kidding. No, you can if you want. But if you want to learn more about the transition time of your dog's life and resources, I do one part. I'm not a vet, and there are vets who specialize in senior dogs, and there are people who are trained psychologists and grief specialists that I can put you in touch with, that you don't need to go through this alone. And I know that it's meant so much to me and Grace, the people who have reached out to us. And
yeah,
some of you are, I've never met you in person, and I know you from Instagram, and it means so much. So thank you. And those of you who may be listening, just a gentle reminder that if you see that somebody has lost a pet, send them a little heart, send them, just let them know, because it is so meaningful. And it's not like when a person dies and people tend to talk about it a little bit more, but with a pet, people tend to suffer in silence more with their grief. And if we can help support each other, I think the world will be a better place.
Ready to find out what your dog wants you to know? Visit talkingwiththedogs.com, book an appointment with me, and we'll find out. Thanks for tuning in to Talking with the Dogs. Hope today's episode made you want to understand your own dog better and appreciate that every dog has a story and something to say. Subscribe now for more dog stories and insights into animal communication and what it's like to be a dog whisperer. Review this episode on Apple Podcasts or follow Talking with the Dogs on Instagram or Facebook and sign up for a chance for you and your dog to be a guest on the show. Whatever you do, I hope you'll spend time talking with the dogs.